Today I'm going to be making a Travis Scott cube. I'm going to take a Travis Scott sample, reflip it to make a Travis Scott beat, and then throw some Travis Scott vocals on top. 3 dimensions of Travis Scott here, Travis Scott cube. So let's get into it. Alright, so the Travis Scott sample that we are looking at was used in How You Feel. As always, you guys know the policy. The way the sample was used in How You Feel was pretty straightforward. It was pretty much just looped, it was slightly sped up, and there was some filtering going on to get rid of the lower frequencies in the sample. But the way I want to reflip this is I want to push the sample a little bit more and do some more advanced sampling techniques here. First off, I'm going to go ahead and open up Momentum. This is a sampler that I just think is better than the ones that come with FL Studio like Fruity Slicer or Slice X, and the best part is it's absolutely free. So if you're interested in a full tutorial video on what this thing has to offer, hit the link right above my head. So I'm going to go ahead, throw the sample in, and get to work. I'm just going to go ahead and listen to the different areas in this sample and see if I can rearrange some of the chops to come up with my own loop. Alright, so going through the sample, I'm not really able to find anything that I find particularly interesting or come up with a loop here. So in situations like this, I like to get a little bit more experimental. The sounds themselves inside of the sample don't necessarily feel all that full or interesting to me. So I'm going to go ahead and try to change them by using a bunch of effects on top of the sample. First off, I'm going to add an EQ on top of the sound, get rid of a lot of the frequencies that I'm probably not going to need, and boost the ones that I probably will, which is most likely in the mid-range area here. Alright, next up I have an idea to add some chorus on top of this sound. I'm just going to leave it at the default setting for now. Again, I don't really have an end goal in mind. I'm just trying to experiment to see what sounds good here. Alright, so the sample's starting to feel a little bit more interesting to me. I'm going to go back into the sample now. I'm also going to play around with the pitch of the sample here. This actually sounds a lot cooler to me now. Let's see if I can go ahead and find some sort of arrangement using all of these chops to come up with a loop. Alright, so I found these notes here and they almost sound like a male vocal sample, and this is why I love using chorus so much. You guys can hear how the sample originally would have sounded without any of these effects. It just sounds like a straightforward horn, but as soon as we add these effects on top, they take on a different quality now and sound like a completely different instrument at this point. So I'm going to look through some of the different chops here and see if I can come up with a loop. Alright, so it sounds like these 4 chops here work well together to come up with this 2-bar loop. I'm going to go ahead and add some more effects on top of my sound. I want to push it even more to be a little bit more large and take up more room in the beat. I'm going to add some bit crushing to add some more higher tones onto the sample, as well as some reverb to make it sit a little bit larger in the beat and also throw it back a tiny bit. So now this sounds like a cool ethereal vocal sample that I'm going to use in my beat. Again, this is how it would have sounded without any effects. Alright, so this loop is sounding cool to me, but by no means is this enough to fill up the entire beat. I might need to lay some chords underneath here, but before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the sample out to see if I can find some complementary sounds that I could use to fill out the beat a little bit more. And just as a quick starting point, I'm just going to duplicate the effects chain that I had here. That way I quickly have an interesting texture, but one important thing I want to do is change the frequency spectrum that I have here. I want to isolate a different frequency spectrum that takes up a different space compared to the loop that I already came up with. I don't need 2 sounds in the same space. This is something that I showed you guys in a sampling video that I made a little while back where I showed you some advanced sampling techniques. So if you haven't seen that video, I explained this type of idea in full, so hit the link right above my head after this video is done if you want to check that out. Alright, so let's go back into the sample here and see if we can find some other sounds. I think this might be a good texture to use to complement my first sound. One thing that I sort of don't like about this sound is that there isn't much movement happening. So I'm going to add some more effects on top here. I've thrown on some vibrato to help bring some variation to the sound. You guys can hear how this would sound if I cranked it all the way up. That's a bit too extreme, so I want it to be a little bit more subtle, so I brought this down. And I also added some auto pan to help this sound be a little bit less one-dimensional. This is just going to add a little bit of movement to my sound so it doesn't sit in the same place throughout the entire beat. So I'm just going to come up with a loop here. Alright, so everything's sounding good to me so far. I think once I add the 808 into this beat, it's really going to help establish an overall melody to the beat and also provide a good foundation and form to the beat and really bring everything together, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and add wave candy on top of this sample here and see what the notes are in my newly made loop here. Alright, so now that I know what the notes are that exist in this loop, I'm going to go ahead and use this information to come up with my 808 pattern. Again, if you have no idea what wave candy is, it's a plugin that comes with FL Studio that will show you all the notes in your sample or your loop if you're using one. It's absolutely one of the most useful tools in FL Studio, so if you want a video on how to use this thing, hit the link right above my head. So according to wave candy, the root note here is an F sharp. So let's hear how this would sound. Alright, perfect. So now that I know the root note, I'm going to go ahead and make my 808 pattern. So far so good. I'm going to keep going on and come up with a basic trap drum pattern now. Sounding good to me so far, and since this is a Travis Scott video, I might as well throw in some of his ad-libs into here. Alright, so I want to throw in some more layers into my beat for a hook potentially and see how that pans out. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Expand 2. Alright, even with this simple counter melody, the beat's sounding pretty dense. I'm going to go ahead and move on to structuring the beat out now. I'm going to go for a straightforward A-B type of structure, where the hook is going to play those additional synths that I laid down, but the verse is not going to have any of those sounds. I'm also going to remove the hi-hat from the main verse as well. I think that's just going to help the beat be a little bit more balanced. So to me, the verse section feels full enough without the hi-hats, so I'm going to go ahead and remove those from the verse section. And instead, I'm going to save the hi-hats to build up energy for the hook section instead. Alright, now that the beat's all complete, let's hear how this sounds with some Travis Scott vocals on top. Had to hit my old town to duck the news. 24-hour lockdown, we made no moves. Now it's 4 a.m. and I'm back up popping with the crew. I just landed in Chase B mixes pop like Jamba Joe's. Different color chains, think my jeweler really selling fruits. And they joking, man, know the crackers wish it was a no. Alright, now that the beat's done, I think it would be a good idea to send this off to Travis Scott himself. In my last video, I tried to email Drake a beat. I know it was a stupid idea, it didn't work. But this time I have a much better idea. What I'm gonna do is mail the beat to Travis Scott. So a quick tip for you guys, all you gotta do is write the person's name that you want to send this off to, and by law, the mailman has to send it. So now I'm just gonna put this beat inside of the envelope here and just send this off. Alright, so I'm gonna send this off in the mail and I'll probably be on the next Travis Scott album.